Before we dive into this story, a brief word of caution. What you're about to hear delves into themes of intense psychological distress, paranoia, and the chilling invasion of personal privacy. If you find such subjects unsettling, please proceed with discretion. This presentation is a journey into the darkest corners of digital existence, where the line between reality and suspicion blurs. Let me tell you something, a few weeks ago, I would have laughed if you told me my life was about to become a paranoid thriller. I was just a regular guy named Michael, living in a quiet suburban town, trying to save a buck on a used hard drive. Now I check the locks 3 times before bed. I keep the blinds drawn even on the brightest days, and every single reflection in my apartment feels like it's holding a secret observer. It started subtly, a flicker, a shadow, a misplaced item. Then came the emails, the calls, the undeniable proof that someone somewhere knows everything about me. And it all began with that hard drive. Just thinking about it makes my palms sweat. Because what I found on it, what they found out I found, has turned my world inside out. This isn't just a story about data. It's a story about a life stolen, a privacy obliterated, and a chilling game of cat and mouse that I never signed up for. And I promise you, you're not ready for what's coming. It was a Tuesday afternoon about a month and a half ago. The sun was shining, a gentle breeze was rustling the leaves outside my window, and I was knee-deep in a personal project. I'm a graphic designer, mostly freelance, and I was working on a massive archive for a client, tons of high-resolution images, video clips, and audio files. My current external drive was groaning under the weight, constantly flashing that annoying disk full warning. I needed more storage fast, but my budget was tighter than a drum. So like any sensible person looking to save some cash, I hit up the local electronics surplus store, tech bargains galore. It's one of those places that smells faintly of dust and ozone, with shelves stacked high with discontinued gadgets, refurbished laptops, and mountains of cables. You know the type. I bought stuff there before, never had an issue. David, the owner, is a gruff but honest guy who knows his tech. I walked in, nodded to David, who was buried behind a pile of old motherboards, and headed straight for the hard drive section. They had a decent selection of used external drives, all wiped, tested, and guaranteed for a month. I picked out a sleek black 4 terabytes drive, a brand I recognized, for a fraction of the retail price. Felt like a win. A smart, economical decision. Oh, how wrong I was. That little black box was a Pandora's box, and I was about to pry it open. I got home, plugged it in, and my computer immediately recognized it. Perfect. I started transferring some of my project files over, watching the progress bar crawl along. While that was happening, I decided to do a quick check just to be thorough. I opened Disk Utility, curious to see the partition map and ensure everything was indeed clean. That's when I noticed it. The drive was partitioned into 2 volumes. One, a standard 3.8 terabytes partition labeled New Volume, which was where my files were going. The other, much smaller, was only about 20 gigabytes, and it was labeled System for Backup. That wasn't unusual in itself. Sometimes manufacturers include recovery partitions, or previous owners might have made one. But this was an external drive, and a 20 gigabyte system backup on an external drive felt out of place. It wasn't hidden, just a separate, smaller partition that David clearly hadn't bothered to wipe, probably assuming it was innocuous. My curiosity, the very trait that makes me good at digging through layers for a client's brand identity, kicked in. I clicked on System_Backup. It wasn't empty. There were folders, but they didn't look like a standard Windows or Mac backup. The folder names were cryptic: Project_Echo, Data_Logs, Directive_7. No personal photos, no documents titled My Resume or Vacation Pics 2022. This was something else entirely. I clicked on Project_Echo. Inside were dozens of subfolders, each named with a string of seemingly random alphanumeric characters. I opened one. It contained a single file, a.txt document. The file name was observer_report_001.txt. My heart gave a little thump. Observer report? What was this? Some kind of role-playing game? A strange hobbyist project? I double-clicked it. The document opened, and the first line hit me like a splash of cold water. Target acquired, Michael Davies. Location: my home address. Activity: online presence consistent with independent graphic design work. Current project: archiving client data for Horizon Innovations. My breath hitched. Michael Davies. That's my name. my home address, my current client. Every single detail was accurate. It wasn't a game. This was real. And it was about me. I scrolled down, my eyes wide, scanning the text. It was a detailed log written in a detached, almost clinical tone. Dates, times, observations of my daily routine. 7:30 a.m. Subject observed making coffee. 8:15 a.m. Subject began work on computer, accessing client files. 12:45 p.m. Subject ordered delivery from Pizza Palace. It was unnervingly precise. It even mentioned a specific brand of coffee I preferred and the exact pizza I'd ordered the previous Tuesday. My mind raced. How could this be on a used hard drive I just bought? Was this some incredibly elaborate prank? But the level of detail, the sheer accuracy, it felt too real, too invasive to be a joke. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle at the back of my neck. I closed the file, my hand trembling slightly as I moved the mouse. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe there was another Michael Davies in the world who lived at my address, worked on graphic design, and ordered pizza from the same place. But the odds of that were astronomically small. I navigated back to the system_backup partition, then to theta_logs. This folder was filled with what looked like encrypted communication logs. File names like com_003.enc and secure_transmit_12.log. I tried to open one, but it was password protected. Then I saw directive_7. This folder was different. It contained a single small video file. Exit_stratagem for initiation MP4. My fingers hesitated over the file. A part of me screamed to just eject the drive, throw it in the trash, and pretend I'd never seen it. But the other part, the part that was now utterly terrified and desperately needed answers, compelled me to click. The video was short, only about 30 seconds. It showed a grainy night vision recording from what appeared to be a fixed camera. It was a street scene, dark and indistinct. Then a figure emerged from the shadows, moving quickly, almost stealthily, towards a house. My house. The video ended abruptly with a flash of light and a muffled thud. The screen went black. My breath hitched in my throat. I sat there, staring at the blank monitor, the faint hum of my computer the only sound in the otherwise silent room. My heart was pounding, a frantic drum against my ribs. This wasn't a game. This wasn't a prank. This was surveillance. Professional, chillingly accurate surveillance. And the target, the subject of these observer reports, was me. The video, that flash, that thud, was that someone breaking into my house? Or someone leaving? And why was it called exit strategy initiation? I felt a sudden, inexplicable chill, even though my apartment was warm. It wasn't just the content of the files. It was the eerie realization that these observations were current. The pizza order, the client project. These weren't old, stale data. They were happening now. As I sat there trying to process the sheer impossibility of it all, a small, almost imperceptible flicker caught my eye. It was my webcam, perched innocently on top of my monitor. The tiny indicator light, usually off unless I was on a video call, was glowing a faint, steady green. It was on. It had been on this entire time, and I hadn't turned it on. A cold dread seeped into my bones, a feeling more profound than anything I'd ever experienced. My own webcam staring back at me, its little green eye a silent witness. Was it recording me right now? Had it been recording me the moment I plugged in the drive? The moment I opened that first file? The thought hit me with the force of a physical blow. The hard drive hadn't just contained information about me. It had activated something that was now watching me right here, right now in my own home. And a terrifying, undeniable truth began to solidify in my mind. They didn't just know about me because of these files. They knew I had the files, and they knew I was looking at them. And a terrifying, undeniable truth began to solidify in my mind. They didn't just know about me because of these files. They knew I had the files, and they knew I was looking at them. The realization hit me like a physical blow. My breath hitched in my throat, a cold knot forming in my stomach. My apartment, once my sanctuary, now felt like a glass box under a microscope. Every shadow seemed to deepen. Every creak of the old building amplified into a warning. My eyes darted around the room, frantically searching for an answer, a hidden lens, anything that could explain the impossible. But there was nothing, just the familiar clutter of my living space, now imbued with a sinister, watching presence. My first instinct was primal. shut it all down, slam the laptop lid, rip out the hard drive, throw it in the nearest river. But a chilling thought stopped me cold. If they knew I had the files and knew I was looking at them, what would my sudden disappearance from their digital radar signal? Would it confirm their suspicions? Would it escalate their response? The thought was paralyzing. I was already in their game whether I liked it or not. My only chance, I reasoned, was to understand the rules. To understand them. My hand, trembling slightly, reached for the mouse. I had to go back in. I had to find out what was so important, so dangerous, that it warranted this level of surveillance. Swallowing hard, I forced myself to ignore the frantic beat of my heart and the cold sweat prickling my skin. My gaze returned to the laptop screen, to the open folder that contained my new nightmare. I began to click through the directories with a grim determination. The files were meticulously organized, a stark contrast to the chaotic jumble I usually kept on my own devices. There were folders with cryptic labels: Project Chimera, Observer Logs, Phase 4 Protocols. Each one felt like a door to a deeper, darker secret. I started with Project Chimera. Inside were dozens of subfolders, each named with a string of alphanumeric characters. I randomly clicked on one, CX734 Alpha. It opened to reveal a collection of documents, most of them plain text files or PDFs. I opened the first one. It was a report, but not just any report. It was a detailed surveillance log. The language was cold, clinical, devoid of emotion. It meticulously documented the daily routines of an individual. Their waking hours, their commute, their coffee orders, their interactions, even their emotional states as inferred from their body language. It read like a scientific study of a specimen, not a human being. My blood ran cold as I scrolled, the sheer invasiveness of it making my skin crawl. This wasn't just observation, this was psychological dissection. I closed the file, my stomach churning. Who were these people? What kind of organization could conduct surveillance with such chilling precision? And more importantly, why? I opened another file, then another. Each one was a different subject, a different life laid bare. Some were clearly high-profile figures, others seemed utterly ordinary. It was a terrifying mosaic of human vulnerability. Then I saw it. In the Observer Logs folder, amidst dozens of other files, one stood out. It was a text file, simply titled Delta 7. A strange magnetic dread pulled me towards it. My finger hovered over the trackpad, a wave of nausea washing over me. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to stop, to not open it, to preserve whatever sliver of blissful ignorance I had left. But the curiosity, the desperate need to know, was stronger. I clicked. The file opened, and the world tilted. It was a surveillance log just like the others. But as my eyes scanned the opening lines, a sickening familiarity began to creep in. Subject: Delta 7. Location: 17B, Evergreen Apartments, Maple Street, my city. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of pure terror. My apartment number. My street. My city. I scrolled down, my vision blurring, my hands clammy. The details that followed were precise, horrifyingly accurate. Routine: wakes typically 7:15 a.m. Coffee preference: black, no sugar. Local cafe, The Daily Grind, Monday to Friday. It described my morning ritual, my work hours, my occasional late-night takeout orders from the Chinese place down the street. It detailed my recent purchase of a new gaming console, even the specific model. It noted the recurring schedule of my online Dungeons and Dragons group on Tuesday evenings. Every mundane, intimate detail of my life, laid bare in cold, objective prose. I was Delta 7. I was a subject. I had been under surveillance for how long? The log spanned months, even years. This wasn't a recent development. This was a long-term operation. As I stared at the screen, a single, almost imperceptible flick of light caught my eye. It was my smart speaker, sitting innocently on my bookshelf. The small LED ring, usually off unless I was interacting with it, briefly illuminated a soft, almost imperceptible blue for less than a second, then extinguished. It was so fleeting, so subtle, that if I hadn't been hyper-alert, I would have missed it entirely. But in that moment, it was a thunderclap. It wasn't just digital. It wasn't just remote. They were here. They were interacting with my environment. My own devices, my own home were compromised. A cold, hard anger began to mix with my fear. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a random hard drive. This was deliberate. This hard drive, containing my own dossier, had been left for me to find. I wasn't just an accidental discoverer. I was an intended recipient. I was being tested, or worse, I was being recruited. My mind raced, trying to process the implications. If they wanted me to find this, why? What was their game? What did they want from me? I tried to regain control, to think logically. I needed to secure these files, get them offline, or at least get them to someone I trusted. My fingers flew across the keyboard, trying to copy the Project Chimera folder to a secure, encrypted USB drive I kept for emergencies. I dragged the folder icon, watched the progress bar appear. It crawled, agonizingly slow, then stuttered. The transfer speed plummeted, then flatlined. My laptop screen froze, the cursor stuck in place. A small, almost invisible progress icon in my system tray, usually indicating network activity, glowed a faint, unsettling red. It wasn't just my laptop. My entire internet connection seemed to seize up. I tried to open a web browser, but it wouldn't load. My phone, sitting next to me on the desk, suddenly lost its Wi-Fi signal, switching to cellular data without my input. They weren't just watching, they were interfering. They were preventing me from acting. Panic began to rise again, a suffocating wave. I tried to force quit the unresponsive transfer, but the laptop remained frozen. I slammed the lid shut, then opened it again, hoping for a reset. Nothing. The screen remained locked, displaying the frozen transfer window. Suddenly, the screen flickered. The frozen window vanished. In its place, a small video player application launched automatically. I hadn't opened it. I hadn't clicked anything. It just appeared. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would burst through my chest. A video began to play. It was a live feed, and it was showing my apartment. The camera angle was unfamiliar, subtly positioned somewhere I couldn't immediately pinpoint, high up in a corner of the room perhaps. But there was no mistaking the setting. My bookshelf, my messy coffee table, my worn armchair. And in the center of the frame, staring wide-eyed at the laptop screen, was me. My eyes, wide with horror, darted from the screen to the ceiling, to the corners of the room, desperately searching for the hidden lens. There was nothing. No visible camera, no blinking red light, nothing. Yet the video continued, showing me in real time my frantic search. And then a line of text, stark white against the grainy video feed, appeared at the bottom of the screen. "Welcome, Delta 7. We've been expecting you. Welcome, Delta 7. We've been expecting you." The words burned into my retina, searing themselves onto my mind even as the grainy video feed of my own panicked face flickered. Delta 7. The name, a cold, clinical designation, echoed in the sudden, suffocating silence of my apartment. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the impossible reality unfolding before me. Expecting me? How? Why? I hadn't even known this hard drive existed until yesterday, let alone anticipated a cryptic welcome from an unknown observer. My breath hitched. My hands, still hovering over the keyboard, began to tremble uncontrollably. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't a glitch. This was real. The camera, wherever it was, had been watching me, recording my every desperate movement, my every silent plea for an explanation. The realization hit me like a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. Every corner of my small apartment, every personal space I cherished had been invaded. My privacy wasn't just breached, it was obliterated, replaced by a chilling, voyeuristic spotlight. I stared at the screen, my eyes darting between my distorted reflection in the video and the stark white text that now seemed to mock me. Delta 7. It sounded like a code, a military designation, a subject number in some twisted experiment. I was Michael, a freelance web designer, not a secret agent or a government test subject. The absurdity of it all battled with the icy tendrils of fear coiling in my gut. My gaze snapped to the hard drive, still humming faintly on my desk. It was the source, it had to be. This whole nightmare had begun the moment I plugged it in. Without thinking, I lunged, my fingers fumbling for the USB cable. I had to disconnect it. I had to rip it out, smash it, burn it, whatever it took to sever this horrifying connection. But my hands, slick with sweat, struggled. The cable, usually so cooperative, felt stuck, as if fused to the port. I tugged harder, gritting my teeth, my muscles straining. The hard drive itself seemed to resist, its weight suddenly feeling immense, rooted to my desk. I pulled with all my might, a desperate guttural sound escaping my throat. The cable finally gave way with a sharp, almost painful snap. The screen went black. A wave of relief, potent and dizzying, washed over me. It was over. I had done it. I had cut the cord, silenced the watchful eye. I stood there, panting, the hard drive clutched in my hand, its cool casing a stark contrast to my feverish skin. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by my ragged breathing. But the relief was short-lived, replaced almost instantly by a colder, deeper dread. The computer without the hard drive was still on. The monitor, though black, wasn't off. It was just not displaying anything. And then a single pixel flickered to life in the center of the screen, a tiny pinprick of white against the black void. It expanded slowly, deliberately, until the same grainy video feed reappeared, showing my apartment, showing me standing there, the hard drive still clutched in my hand. And at the bottom of the screen, the text returned. This time it was even more direct. "You can't disconnect us, Delta 7. You are already part of the network." A scream caught in my throat, strangled by terror. My grip on the hard drive loosened, and it clattered to the floor with a dull thud. It wasn't the hard drive. Or rather, it wasn't just the hard drive. The surveillance, the connection, it was something deeper, something that had embedded itself into my system, perhaps even into my apartment beyond a simple USB connection. I stumbled backward, knocking against my desk chair, sending it skidding across the floor. My eyes darted around the room, searching with a frantic intensity one hadn't possessed moments ago. Where was it? Where was the camera? If it wasn't the hard drive directly, then what? A pinhole lens? A hidden sensor? Every shadow seemed to stretch. Every inanimate object seemed to hold a sinister secret. I tore through my apartment like a madman. I pulled books from shelves, appending them onto the floor. I yanked out power cords, searching for anything unusual, any tiny device that shouldn't be there. I overturned cushions on my sofa, ran my hands along the back of my television, even peered into the small, dark recesses of my air conditioning unit. Nothing. Not a single blinking light. Not a suspicious wire. Not a tiny lens. My apartment, which had always felt like a sanctuary, now felt like a cage, its walls closing in. Every surface a potential hiding spot for an unseen eye. My reflection in the computer screen continued to show my increasingly desperate actions, a silent, damning testament to my helplessness. I could see myself, hair disheveled, eyes wide with terror, a wild, cornered animal. The entity on the other side was watching, undoubtedly amused by my futile struggle. "The camera is everywhere, Delta 7. Another line of text appeared, almost as if it were responding to my frantic search, to my very thoughts. "You cannot hide from us." My blood ran cold. Everywhere. Was it a network of cameras? Was my entire apartment wired? The thought was sickening. How long had this been in place? Was it there before I bought the hard drive, just waiting to be activated? Or had the hard drive itself been a Trojan horse, unleashing this unseen surveillance system the moment it touched my computer? I sank to my knees, my breath coming in ragged gasps. My mind raced, trying to grasp at any shred of logic. Who would do this? Why me? What was Delta 7? It had to be a reference to something, some prior connection I was unaware of. But my life was mundane. I had no enemies, no secrets that warranted such an elaborate, terrifying invasion. Then a new thought, chilling in its implications, began to form. "We've been expecting you. This wasn't random. This wasn't a mistake. Someone wanted me to find that hard drive. Someone wanted me to plug it in. I was a pawn, an unwitting participant in a game I didn't understand, a role I had been cast into without my consent." I looked back at the screen, my own face staring back at me, contorted in fear. The feeling of being watched intensified, a palpable pressure on my skin. I felt exposed, vulnerable, as if my very soul was laid bare. Every private moment, every unguarded gesture, every flicker of emotion, all of it was being catalogued, analyzed by an unseen, malevolent presence. My phone. I needed to call someone. The police. But what would I say? My computer is watching me and calling me Delta 7? They think I was insane. They dismiss it as a prank or a mental breakdown. No, I was on my own. I needed to fight back. But how do you fight an invisible enemy? An entity that claims to be everywhere? I needed more information. I needed to understand what this network was, what Delta 7 meant, and most importantly, what they wanted. My eyes fixed on the hard drive, lying innocently on the floor. It was the key. It had to be. Even if it wasn't the direct source of the camera, it was the trigger. It contained something that had activated this nightmare. I had to get back into it. I had to delve deeper despite the growing dread. With a renewed sense of grim determination, I reached for the hard drive. My hand still trembled, but a cold resolve was beginning to replace the sheer panic. I would find answers. I had to. As I picked up the drive, the screen flickered again. The video feed of my apartment zoomed in, focusing on my hand as I held the hard drive. And then a new message appeared, not at the bottom, but across the center of the screen in bold, red letters this time. Curiosity killed the cat, Delta 7. But it also fed the beast. The words hung in the air, a sinister warning, a promise of something far worse than just surveillance. It was a challenge, a taunt. They knew what I was thinking. They were anticipating my next move, and they were daring me to take it. A shiver ran down my spine, but I refused to back down. My privacy was gone. My peace of mind was shattered. All I had left was the desperate need for answers, even if those answers led me deeper into the abyss. I would open the hard drive again. I would face whatever horrors lay within, because the alternative, living under the constant, silent gaze of an unknown enemy, was a fate far worse than anything I could imagine. I would feed the beast, but I would do it on my terms. Or so I desperately hoped. My plan, meticulously crafted over sleepless nights, was simple in its core objective: isolate the threat. If this hard drive was a digital Pandora's box, I would open it in a sterile environment, one where its malevolent contents couldn't infect my life any further. I spent days researching not just on data forensics but on digital security, on ways to create an air-gap system truly impenetrable by external forces. The internet was a cesspool of theories, half-truths, and terrifying possibilities, but I gleaned enough to formulate my strategy. First, I needed a new machine. Not my everyday laptop, not a device that had ever touched my home network or carried any fragment of my digital identity. I bought a cheap, bare-bones laptop from a discount electronics store, paying cash, using a circuitous route to get there, and even wearing a hat and sunglasses, feeling utterly ridiculous but thoroughly paranoid. This machine would be a sacrificial lamb, a digital quarantine zone. It would never connect to the internet, not even for a second. Its only purpose was to interface with the hard drive. Next, the location. My apartment was compromised. My car, my phone, even the air I breathed felt tainted by the invisible gaze. I needed somewhere truly detached. A friend, Sarah, was out of town for a month, leaving her small, sparsely furnished studio apartment vacant. I offered to water her plants, feed her cat, a convenient excuse to request the spare key. She was trusting, oblivious, and for that, I felt a pang of guilt, but the urgency of my situation overshadowed it. Her apartment was on the top floor of an old brick building, with thick walls and minimal shared spaces. It felt like a bunker, a temporary sanctuary. I bought a Faraday bag, a thick metallic-lined pouch designed to block electromagnetic fields. It was meant for phones or tablets, but I figured it might offer a psychological, if not practical, barrier for the hard drive itself when not in use. I also invested in a USB data blocker, a small device that prevents data transfer while still allowing power, just in case the hard drive had some latent ability to communicate through its power connection. Overkill? Perhaps. But in my current state, there was no such thing as too much caution. The night I finally decided to proceed, the air in Sarah's apartment was heavy with the scent of dust and stale potpourri. The only light came from a single desk lamp, its glow casting long, dancing shadows. My hands trembled as I laid out my tools: the new laptop, the hard drive, a USB to SATA adapter, the data blocker, and a freshly installed, open-source operating system on the laptop, chosen for its transparency and security features. I took a series of slow, deliberate breaths, trying to calm the frantic thrumming in my chest. This wasn't just about data. It was about confronting the source of my terror, peeling back the layers of this digital onion to reveal the rot within. I plugged the data blocker into the laptop, then the adapter into the blocker, and finally, with a click that echoed unnaturally loud in the quiet room, the hard drive into the adapter. The laptop's fan whirred to life, a low, constant hum that was the only sound besides my own ragged breathing. The screen flickered, displaying the familiar desktop of the new OS. I navigated to the File Explorer, my finger hovering over the icon. This was it, the moment of truth. I clicked. A new drive appeared in the sidebar. Local disk E. No fancy name, no cryptic label. Just a generic system designation. My heart hammered against my ribs. It was there. It was accessible. I double-clicked, and a new window opened, revealing the hard drive's contents. At first glance, it was underwhelming. A series of folders, documents, pictures, videos, music, standard stuff. My initial fear, that it would immediately launch some malicious program or display something overtly horrifying, proved unfounded. It looked like a perfectly normal, albeit previously owned, hard drive. But something felt off. The sheer volume of files, and the dates. Many of the folders were labeled with dates stretching back years, but others were very recent, some even from the past few weeks. I started with documents. Inside, there wasn't the usual jumble of personal files. Instead, I found a meticulously organized hierarchy. Folders labeled by city, then by neighborhood, then by street address. It was unsettlingly precise. I started scrolling, my eyes darting across the screen. There were hundreds of these folders. Thousands. My breath hitched. One of the street names, it was my street. I clicked on it, a cold dread washing over me. Inside, another folder. App 304. My apartment number. My hands were shaking so violently I almost dropped the mouse. This wasn't random. This wasn't a coincidence. This was about me. I opened App 304. Inside, there were no documents in the traditional sense. Instead, I found a series of subfolders, each labeled with a specific date. And they stretched back not just to when I bought the hard drive, but before. Weeks before. Months. I clicked on the earliest date, a date almost a year ago. The folder was empty. I tried the next one. Empty. And the next and the next. A frustrating, terrifying blank. Was it a bluff? A dummy directory? I scrolled forward, past the date I moved into my apartment, past the date I bought the hard drive. I kept going, my finger aching from the constant scrolling, until I reached a folder dated just a few days after my purchase. This one wasn't empty. Inside were two files. One was an audio file, kitchen_ambient_01.wave. The other, a text file, daily_log_01.txt. I clicked on the text file first. It opened to a plain document, a series of bullet points. 7 a.m. Subject woke, prepared coffee. 7:15 a.m. Subject used laptop in living room. 7:45 a.m. Subject showered. 8:15 a.m. Subject left apartment. 6:30 p.m. Subject returned, ordered takeout. 7 p.m. Subject watched TV. 10:30 p.m. Subject went to bed. My blood ran cold. This was a detailed, almost minute-by-minute account of my day. A day I remembered vividly. A day I thought was utterly unremarkable and private. Every detail was accurate. The coffee, the laptop, the takeout. How could anyone know this? How could they have recorded it with such precision? My gaze drifted to the audio file. kitchen_ambient_01.wave. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the play button. What would I hear? My own mundane sounds? Or something far more sinister? I clicked. A faint hiss of static filled the silent room. Then the undeniable sound of running water. My faucet. The clinking of a ceramic mug. The soft whir of my coffee maker. And then a low, indistinct murmur. Was it me talking to myself? I often did, lost in thought. The recording was short, perhaps 5 minutes. It captured the sounds of my morning routine in my kitchen with unnerving clarity. It was as if someone had placed a microphone right there on my counter, listening to every private moment. But there was no microphone. I checked. Repeatedly. I closed the files, my mind racing. This wasn't just surveillance. This was intimate, invasive, and it was stored on a hard drive that was now in my possession. I dove deeper, clicking through more date-labeled folders. They were all similar. Audio files, sometimes accompanied by these chillingly precise daily logs. Some logs mentioned visitors, specific conversations I'd had with friends, even details of my phone calls that I thought were private. It was like reading a diary of my own life, written by a malevolent stranger. Then I found a folder simply labeled Anomalies. My breath hitched. I clicked on it. Inside, there was a single file. App 304 for anomaly 2023 27 and 4. A video file, dated just last week. My finger trembled as I clicked play. The video was low resolution, grainy, clearly shot from a distance through a window. It showed the exterior of my apartment building. The angle was from across the street, possibly from another building. It zoomed in slowly, unnervingly on my window. Then a figure appeared in my living room, visible through the glass. It was me. I was sitting on my couch, absorbed in my laptop, just as the log file had described. The camera held steady, watching. It felt like an eternity, though the video was only a minute long. This wasn't just microphones. This was visual. Someone was physically watching me, from a vantage point I hadn't even considered. The sheer audacity, the methodical nature of it, sent a shiver of pure terror down my spine. I closed the video, my heart pounding like a drum solo. This wasn't just a threat. This was a declaration. They wanted me to know. They wanted me to find this. I scrolled through the files, a frantic desperation seizing me. I needed to find who did this, why. I needed to find a name, an address, anything. Then I saw it. A folder, almost hidden amongst the date-stamped surveillance logs, simply labeled, Project Echo. My hands felt numb. I clicked on it. Inside, there were no more surveillance logs or ambient sounds. Instead, I found a single subfolder, labeled with the exact current date. November 8, 2023. Today. My blood ran cold. This was impossible. I was in Sarah's apartment, miles from my own, in an isolated environment. I clicked on November 8, 2023. Inside there was one file. A single audio file. Unit 21B_audio_law_wave. Unit 21B. That was the number of the storage unit I had rented just yesterday, the one I had rejected as too exposed, too public, in favor of Sarah's apartment. I had only used it for a few hours to store some boxes. I hadn't even considered it a viable option for this operation. My fingers, stiff with dread, moved to the play button. The laptop speakers filled with a familiar sound. The low, consistent hum of the cheap fan from this very laptop. The quiet creak of the plastic chair I was sitting on. And then, unmistakably, my own ragged breath, shallow and fast, exactly as it was now. It was a recording of me. Right here. Right now. In this isolated apartment. They knew. They had known all along. Every single precaution I had taken, every desperate attempt at secrecy, had been utterly futile. The hard drive wasn't just a repository of past horrors. It was a living, breathing extension of the watchful eye. And I, the fool, had just plugged it directly into my temporary sanctuary. The cold dread that seized me was unlike anything I had ever known. It wasn't the sudden shock of a monster jumping out, but the slow, agonizing realization that I had walked blindfolded into a meticulously laid trap. My temporary sanctuary, the quiet apartment I had rented under a false name, the one I had convinced myself was my safe haven, was now just another stage for their twisted surveillance. I stared at the blinking LED on the hard drive enclosure, a tiny, innocuous light that now seemed to pulse with malevolent intent, a direct line back to the very people I was fleeing. My hands trembled as I reached for the USB cable, my mind screaming to rip it out, to destroy the insidious device. But then a terrifying thought paralyzed me. What had it already done? How much information had it siphoned from my laptop, from this supposedly clean machine, in the mere minutes it had been connected? My new email accounts, my temporary IP address, perhaps even the rough location derived from my Wi-Fi networks. All of it potentially compromised. Ripping it out now felt like closing the barn door after the horses had bolted. The damage I feared was already done. I pulled the cable out anyway, slowly, deliberately, as if detaching a bomb. The tiny LED extinguished, plunging the small device into darkness, but the darkness in my mind only deepened. The silence that followed was deafening, filled with the echo of my own frantic heartbeat. I clutched the hard drive, its plastic casing suddenly feeling like a venomous creature in my palm. This wasn't just about data anymore. This was a personal violation, an invasion of my last shreds of privacy. They hadn't just found me, they had allowed me to believe I was safe, only to yank the rug out from under me at the most vulnerable moment. It was a psychological game, a deliberate act of terror. My mind raced, trying to piece together the how. A sophisticated rootkit? A hardware keylogger built into the enclosure itself? Or something even more insidious, something that didn't just record but transmitted, a miniature radio beacon hidden within its circuitry? The sheer audacity, the technical prowess required, sent shivers down my spine. This wasn't the work of a lone hacker. This was an organized, well-funded operation. I walked to the window, peering through the blinds into the quiet street below. Every car that passed, every shadow that shifted, seemed to hold a sinister significance. Was someone out there right now, watching this apartment, confirming my location? Had they sent a team? The paranoia was a suffocating blanket, pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. I felt exposed, naked, even behind locked doors and drawn curtains. Sleep was an impossible luxury. The hard drive lay on my desk, a silent sentinel, its presence a constant reminder of the unseen eyes. I spent the rest of the night pacing, my thoughts spiraling into a vortex of fear and frustration. I tried to analyze my laptop, running every diagnostic tool I knew, scanning for anything unusual. But a truly sophisticated piece of malware, one designed to evade detection, wouldn't show itself so easily. It was like trying to find a ghost in a machine. By dawn, exhausted but wired, a new resolve began to form amidst the fear. Running hadn't worked. Hiding hadn't worked. Every move I made seemed to be anticipated. If they were watching me, if they were playing a game, then I had to understand the rules. I had to stop being a pawn and start trying to understand the player. The hard drive, though it was my leash, was also paradoxically my only potential source of answers. I needed to re-engage with it, but on my terms, in a completely isolated environment. I couldn't risk connecting it to my laptop again. I needed a completely disposable computer, something that could be wiped clean or even destroyed without consequence. My mind went back to the old, dusty computer repair shop I had seen a few blocks away, the kind of place that dealt in ancient hardware and didn't ask too many questions. It was a long shot, but it was a plan. Later that morning, after a quick furtive trip, I returned with a cheap battered netbook from the early 2010s. It was slow, outdated, and barely functional, but it was completely air-gapped, never to be connected to the internet. I also bought a cheap USB hub and an old pre-formatted flash drive. My goal was to create a sterile, isolated environment where I could examine the hard drive's contents without risking further compromise. Back in the apartment, I set up my makeshift lab. The netbook sat on a separate table, far from my actual laptop. I would connect the hard drive to it via the USB hub, then try to copy its contents to the flash drive for offline analysis. It was a risky maneuver, but I had to know. I had to understand what else was hidden within those corrupted files, those encrypted folders, those watcher logs. With trembling fingers, I connected the external hard drive to the old netbook. The familiar LED blinked to life, a small defiant beacon in the dimly lit room. I held my breath, watching the netbook screen as it slowly recognized the device. It was a tense, agonizing wait. What if it infected this machine too? What if the rootkit was designed to jump to any connected device? But nothing seemed to happen immediately. The netbook displayed the drive, labeled simply Local Disk H. Taking a deep breath, I double-clicked. The folders appeared: Personal, Projects, Encrypted, and Watcher Logs. The same ones I had seen before, but now viewed through the terrifying lens of real-time surveillance. I navigated to the Watcher Logs folder. This time I didn't just skim. I opened the most recent text file, its timestamp just hours old. My eyes scanned the lines of code, the IP addresses, the timestamps, and then I saw it. A series of entries detailing network connections, file access, and even webcam activation, all originating from my laptop yesterday night in this apartment. My blood ran cold. It wasn't just a passive recording device. It was an active agent. It had communicated with my system, extracted information, and then logged its own actions. The hard drive wasn't just being watched. It was doing the watching and reporting back to its masters. But then a new set of entries caught my eye. These weren't about my laptop. They were different, labeled with an unfamiliar prefix, sys_for upload. And the timestamps were even more recent, just minutes before I had unplugged the drive. It detailed a rapid data transfer, a massive upload, not from my laptop but from the hard drive itself. It was uploading. It wasn't just logging and waiting for me to connect it to the internet. It had found a way to transmit data directly. But how? The netbook wasn't connected to Wi-Fi. My laptop was off. A gut-wrenching realization hit me. The enclosure, the external casing of the hard drive. It wasn't just a passive shell. It must contain its own wireless capabilities, its own miniature cellular modem, or even a satellite module. It was a self-contained surveillance unit, constantly transmitting, constantly watching, no matter where it was plugged in, or even if it was just sitting there powered on. My laptop had merely been a power source and a convenient target for its internal malware. The moment I had plugged it in, It had not only infiltrated my laptop but had also begun transmitting its own stored data and fresh recordings to its unknown handlers. The Watcher logs weren't just logs of their surveillance. They were logs of the hard drive's own activities, a chillingly detailed autobiography of its espionage. And the most recent entry, the massive upload, confirmed that everything I had done, every moment of my supposed escape, every desperate attempt at secrecy, had been utterly futile. The hard drive wasn't just a repository of past horrors. It was a living, breathing extension of the watchful eye. And I, the fool, had just plugged it directly into my temporary sanctuary. A new log entry, one I hadn't seen before, suddenly appeared at the very bottom of the file. It was a single line of text, stark and chilling, almost like a direct message. It read, "Acknowledged. Target acquired. Proceeding to Phase 2. My breath hitched. Phase 2? What did that mean? They weren't just watching. They were actively moving to the next stage of whatever sinister plan they had. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of pure terror. The game was escalating, and I was still just trying to understand the rules. I had stumbled upon something far larger, far more dangerous than I could have ever imagined. The hard drive wasn't just watching me. It was bait, and I had taken it hook, line, and sinker. And now they were reeling me in. The realization hit me like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. I wasn't just observing a mystery. I was in it. The hard drive, sitting innocently on my desk, hummed with a malevolent energy, a silent sentinel reporting my every breath. My apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a gilded cage. Every shadow held a potential observer. Every creak of the floorboards a confirmation of my paranoia. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. My mind raced, replaying every strange occurrence, every fleeting glance, every inexplicable anomaly since that fateful purchase. The car that seemed to follow me for a few blocks, the persistent static on my phone calls, the feeling of eyes on my back in the grocery store aisle. I had dismissed them as coincidence, the anxieties of a busy mind. Now they were pieces of a chilling mosaic, forming a portrait of meticulous, relentless surveillance. The first thing I did was try to sever the connection. With trembling hands, I unplugged the hard drive, its faint indicator light dying with a soft click. A wave of relief, fleeting and false, washed over me. I even considered smashing it, grinding it to dust, eradicating every digital trace. But a cold dread stopped me. What if destroying it was precisely what they wanted? What if it triggered something worse, something irreversible? The bait was taken. Destroying the hook wouldn't free me, it might just make them yank the line harder. I left it unplugged, tucked away in a drawer, a silent, inert threat. But the silence it left behind was even more deafening. The absence of its hum didn't bring peace. It brought a deeper, more insidious fear. They knew I had unplugged it. They knew I was trying to break free. And they would undoubtedly react. The reaction started subtly. My internet connection, usually rock solid, began to fluctuate erratically, dropping out at critical moments, only to spring back to life as if mocking my attempts at digital isolation. My smart thermostat, which I had never manually adjusted, would sometimes crank the heat in the middle of the night or blast the AC in the dead of winter, forcing me to get up, to move, to acknowledge the intrusion. Small, almost imperceptible shifts in my apartment's layout. A book I swore I'd left on the nightstand would be on the coffee table. A framed picture slightly askew. Nothing stolen, nothing vandalized, just moved. A gentle nudge, a constant reminder that my space was no longer my own. I stopped using my phone for anything sensitive, reverting to burner phones for essential calls, but even then I found myself whispering, looking over my shoulder, convinced that the very air around me was wired. My friends, David and Emily, noticed my growing isolation, my haunted eyes, but I couldn't bring myself to tell them. How do you explain to rational people that a used hard drive has ensnared you in a web of unseen watchers? They would think I was losing my mind, and perhaps that was part of the plan too, to isolate me, to make me doubt my own sanity. The psychological warfare intensified. One morning I found a single white feather on my pillow. It wasn't a pigeon feather, or anything from the usual city birds. It was pristine, almost iridescent, like something from a much larger, wilder bird. There were no open windows, no logical explanation. It was a message, stark and clear. Asterisk, we were here. We are closer than you think. Asterisk. My attempts to research the files I had found, the cryptic Project Chimera, and the Watcher protocol, were met with digital dead ends. Every search term led to innocuous results, unrelated scientific projects, or ancient mythological references. It was as if the internet itself had been scrubbed clean of any relevant information, a digital vacuum designed to frustrate and confuse. The encryption on the hidden data remained impenetrable, a mocking barrier between me and the answers I desperately needed. The real shift came a week after I unplugged the hard drive. I needed to get out, to feel human again, even for an hour. I decided to work from a coffee shop a few miles from my apartment, a bustling place where I could blend in. I ordered my usual black coffee, found a small table near the window, and tried to immerse myself in my work. But the feeling of being watched, that familiar prickle on the back of my neck, was stronger than ever. I scanned the room discreetly, a young couple absorbed in their phones, a student hunched over a textbook, an elderly man reading a newspaper, and then I saw her. She was sitting alone at a small table by the wall, nursing a lukewarm tea, her gaze fixed on something just beyond me. Or was it on me? She was in her late 20s, maybe early 30s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and an unremarkable but perfectly tailored gray suit. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe ponytail. Nothing about her screamed threat, yet every fiber of my being screamed danger. She never looked directly at me, not once, but I could feel her presence, a cold, unwavering pressure. Every time I shifted, every time I took a sip of my coffee, I had the inexplicable sensation that she was logging it. My heart hammered against my ribs. Was this one of them? A direct observer? I finished my coffee, packed up my laptop, and tried to leave casually. As I walked past her table, I risked a quick glance. Her eyes, dark and unblinking, met mine for a fraction of a second. There was no hostility, no recognition, just a deep, unsettling emptiness. It was like looking into the eyes of a predator who had already marked its prey. I hurried out, my pace quickening. The mundane sounds of the city suddenly amplified into a cacophony of threats. I didn't look back. I just walked, faster and faster, until I was practically running, my breath ragged in my chest. I hailed a cab, something I rarely did, needing the anonymity, the illusion of escape. When I finally reached my apartment building, the familiar brick facade offered little comfort. The heavy front door, usually a barrier against the outside world, felt flimsy, transparent. I fumbled with my keys, my hands slick with sweat. As I stepped inside my apartment, a chill permeated the air, colder than usual. I immediately noticed it. The small, antique compass that had belonged to my grandfather, usually sitting on my bookshelf, was now placed precisely in the center of my kitchen table. Beside it, a single pristine white feather, identical to the one I had found on my pillow. But it wasn't just the objects. There was a note, folded precisely into a perfect square, resting directly under the compass. My name, Michael, was typed across the top in a stark sans-serif font. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst through my chest. This wasn't a subtle rearrangement. This was a blatant invasion. They had been in my home while I was out, while I was at that coffee shop, under the watchful, empty gaze of that woman. I picked up the note, my fingers trembling. The paper felt thick, expensive. The message was short, chillingly direct. Michael, your curiosity is commendable, but your attempts at detachment are unhelpful. The game has rules. You have broken them. We advise you to reconnect your device. We have a proposition for you. A choice, in fact. Expect contact soon. Further resistance will be met with consequences. There was no signature, no identifiable mark. Just those cold, typed words. The paper itself seemed to radiate menace. They weren't just watching. They were actively manipulating my environment, my life. They weren't just observing my attempts to escape. They were punishing them. The hard drive, still unplugged in my drawer, suddenly felt like a lifeline, not a threat. They wanted me to reconnect it. Why? What was this proposition? What kind of choice? And what were these consequences? The terror was no longer abstract. It was a tangible, suffocating presence in my living room. I wasn't just being watched. I was being herded, guided towards an unknown fate. The bait had been taken, the line was taut, and now they were reeling me in, not to devour me, but to use me. The game had just begun, and I was merely a pawn on their board, forced to make a move. And I knew with a horrifying certainty that my next move would determine everything. The realization hit me like a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. I wasn't just being watched, I was being played. Every subtle nudge, every unsettling incident, every flicker on my screen. It wasn't random, it was orchestrated. They weren't just observing my fear. They were cultivating it, shaping it into a tool to push me in a specific direction. My mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments. Who were they? What did they want? And why me? The hard drive, once a mere curiosity, now felt like a ticking bomb, a digital leash around my neck. Sleep became an impossible luxury. My apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a stage, its walls transparent to unseen eyes. I paced, my thoughts a whirlwind of panic and a desperate need for clarity. The police were out of the question. What would I even tell them? Someone's watching me because I bought a used hard drive, and now I feel like a pawn in a game I don't understand? They'd section me, or at best, dismiss me as a paranoid eccentric. No, I was alone in this. And if I was a pawn, then the only way to survive was to learn the rules of the game, and fast. I returned to the hard drive, not with fear, but with a cold, calculating resolve. It was no longer just data. It was a conversation, a set of instructions I desperately needed to decipher. I plugged it back in, the familiar hum now a sinister purr. I went through every folder, every file, every obscure naming convention I had previously dismissed as digital clutter. I was looking for patterns, for anomalies, for anything that screamed message. Hours blurred into a single agonizing vigil. My eyes burned, my head throbbed, but I couldn't stop. Then, buried deep within a subfolder labeled System Diagnostics, a file I hadn't noticed before. It was named Surface. It hadn't been there, I was sure of it. Or perhaps it had, but I had overlooked it, dismissing it as part of the system's native files. Now its presence felt like a deliberate insertion, a direct command. My fingers trembled as I clicked it open. The screen glowed, illuminating my anxious face. The text was stark, white on black, and devoid of any pleasantries. You have demonstrated sufficient curiosity. Congratulations. You are now ready for the next phase. The information you possess is incomplete. It requires activation. You have been chosen for this task. Fail, and the consequences will extend beyond your immediate understanding. Succeed, and you may yet find peace. The key is not in the data itself, but in its application. Your first directive: locate the file Project Chimera. Encrypted within the drive. You have 24 hours. Awaiting your move. My blood ran cold. Project Chimera. I remembered seeing that file, a massive, heavily encrypted archive, too complex for my basic tools to even touch. I had dismissed it as uncrackable, a dead end. But now it was a directive. And the 24 hours felt like a digital countdown strapped to my chest. Activation. Application. What did that even mean? Were they expecting me to do something with this data, not just read it? My mind reeled. This wasn't about exposing a secret. It was about using it. But to what end? And for whom? The message felt like a twisted invitation, a gauntlet thrown down. I was in whether I liked it or not. The feeling of being a pawn intensified. They were not asking me to make a move, they were telling me to. I searched for Project Chimera. Encrypted again. It was there, just as I remembered, sitting stubbornly in a folder labeled Archive. I tried every decryption tool I had, every online resource, every trick I knew. Nothing. It was a digital fortress, impenetrable. Panic began to claw its way back. 24 hours. I needed help. Professional help. Someone who understood encryption, someone who could tackle something this complex. My mind immediately went to Jessica. Jessica Miller. We'd worked together years ago at a small tech startup. She was brilliant, a genuine prodigy when it came to cybersecurity and data forensics. She was also fiercely independent and notoriously private. But she was the only person I knew who might stand a chance. The thought of involving her sent a fresh wave of dread through me. If I was a pawn, what would that make her? A collateral casualty? But what choice did I have? Failure wasn't an option they'd offered. I pulled out my old phone, untouched for months, and found her number. My thumb hovered over the call button. Could I trust her with this? More importantly, could I expose her to this danger? The consequences will extend beyond your immediate understanding, echoed in my head. That sounded like a threat, not just to me but to anyone I involved. But the clock was ticking. 24 hours. I called. It rang twice, then her crisp, no-nonsense voice answered. Miller. Jessica, it's Michael. Michael Thompson. My voice sounded strained even to my own ears. A slight pause. Michael? Wow, long time no hear. To what do I owe the unexpected pleasure? And you sound like you just ran a marathon. Jessica, I need your help. It's urgent. And it's complicated, highly sensitive, and potentially dangerous. I hated how melodramatic it sounded, but I needed her to understand the gravity immediately. Another pause, longer this time. I could almost hear her calculating, assessing. Jessica didn't do drama. Dangerous, Michael. You've got my attention. What's going on? I can't explain over the phone. I need to show you something. Something I found. I hesitated, then pressed on. Can you meet? Somewhere discreet. Your office, maybe? I'm willing to pay whatever your rates are. My rates are higher for potentially dangerous and highly sensitive, she retorted, a hint of dry humor in her voice, but I sensed her underlying curiosity. And no, my office isn't discreet. It's a glass box. Meet me at the old coffee shop, the Daily Grind, on Elm Street. You know the one. In an hour. And bring whatever it is you need to show me. But seriously, Michael, if this is about your ex-girlfriend's forgotten photo album, you're wasting both our time. It's not. It's much bigger than that, I assured her, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. An hour. Thank you, Jessica. I hung up, a knot of apprehension tightening in my stomach. I was dragging her into this, a brilliant, unassuming woman who had no business being anywhere near this mess. But I had no other choice. This was my move. The first real decision I had made since this nightmare began, and it felt like a gamble with astronomical stakes. I carefully disconnected the hard drive, placing it in a padded, nondescript envelope. I checked my apartment one last time, my eyes sweeping every corner, searching for any new sign of observation, any subtle indicator that they knew my intentions. The silence was unnerving, too perfect. As I stepped out into the crisp evening air, the city lights seemed to mock me, each distant glow a potential eye. I felt exposed, vulnerable, a target moving through a grid. The Daily Grind was a familiar haunt from our startup days, a place of caffeine-fueled brainstorming and late-night coding sessions. Now it felt like a rendezvous point in a spy novel. Jessica was already there, nursing a black coffee, her laptop open but untouched. She looked exactly the same, sharp, focused, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, eyes assessing everything around her. She spotted me immediately, a faint, unreadable expression on her face. "Michael," she said, her voice low as I slid into the booth opposite her. "You look like you haven't slept in a week, and you're carrying a file like it contains the launch codes." I pushed the envelope across the table. "It might as well. Jessica, I need you to look at this." She picked it up, her fingers tracing the outline of the hard drive inside. "What is it?" "It's a used hard drive I bought online a few weeks ago. It contains some unusual files. I think it's part of something much bigger, something dangerous, and I think I'm being watched because of it." I kept my voice hushed, leaning in. She raised an eyebrow, a flicker of skepticism in her gaze, but also that familiar spark of professional curiosity. "Watched? By whom? And what kind of files?" "Highly encrypted data, and a very recent, very direct message instructing me to decrypt a specific file within 24 hours. A file called Project Chimera that encrypted." I could feel the urgency in my own words. Her expression shifted, the skepticism replaced by a serious intensity. "Project Chimera? That's a name I've heard before. In whispers in certain circles. Highly classified, theoretical research. Government-level stuff. Are you sure that's what's on this drive?" "That's what the message implies. And I'm sure someone wants me to unlock it. I'm just a guy who bought a hard drive, Jessica. But now I'm caught in something I don't understand, and I don't know who to trust." She looked at me, then at the envelope, her mind clearly working at hyperspeed. Government-level encryption, a specific directive, a 24-hour deadline, and you're feeling watched. "This isn't a forgotten photo album, is it?" "No," I whispered. "It's a trap. And I think I just walked into it." She took a slow sip of her coffee, her eyes scanning the busy cafe, not with paranoia, but with a practiced awareness. "All right, Michael. Let's see what we're dealing with. Give me the rundown on everything you found so far, every oddity, every strange occurrence, no matter how small. And then we try to crack Project Chimera." She picked up the hard drive, a determined glint in her eyes. "But be warned, she added, her voice dropping even lower. If this is what I think it is, we're not just looking at a data forensics challenge. We're looking at a hornet's nest. And stirring it up could get us both stung. My heart pounded. The game had indeed begun. And now I had dragged someone else onto the board. The 24-hour clock was ticking, and the weight of Project Chimera felt heavier than ever. My next move, or rather our next move, would indeed determine everything. And the stakes had just multiplied beyond anything I could have imagined. The image of the Chimera, a monstrous hybrid, burned itself into my mind. 24 hours. That was all the time we had. Jessica, her face pale, looked at me, her eyes reflecting the same dread that was churning in my gut. We were no longer just dealing with a creepy hard drive or a stalker. We were staring down the barrel of something immense, something designed to fundamentally alter the world as we knew it. Societal influence and control, Jessica whispered, her voice barely audible. Michael, what even is that? I shook my head, the words failing me. My mind raced, trying to grasp the scale of it. Control. Not just surveillance, but control. It wasn't just about watching people. It was about making them think, believe, and act in specific ways. The implications were staggering, terrifying. This wasn't just about the hard drive anymore. This was about everything. We have to stop it, I said, my voice hoarse, the words feeling utterly inadequate for the task ahead. Jessica nodded, her jaw set. But how? We have no idea what Project Chimera even is, beyond a chilling description. And who is they? The people behind this aren't amateurs. They've been watching you, Michael, for weeks, maybe months. They're organized, powerful, and clearly ruthless. She was right. Every instinct screamed at us to run, to disappear, to pretend we'd never seen a single bite of this data. But the thought of what Project Chimera could unleash, the insidious grip it could exert over millions, maybe billions, was a far more potent motivator than any fear for our own safety. We had stumbled onto something monumental, and walking away wasn't an option. We go back to the source, I said, pointing at the hard drive still connected to Jessica's laptop. There has to be more. Something we missed. Something that only makes sense now that we have the context of Chimera. Jessica didn't hesitate. She immediately began dissecting the hard drive's contents with renewed intensity. Every line of code, every seemingly innocuous file, was now scrutinized under the ominous shadow of the 24-hour deadline. We were searching for any anomaly, any hidden directory, any fragment of data that could give us a foothold, a direction. Hours blurred into a frantic haze. The apartment was silent save for the rapid clicking of Jessica's keyboard and the occasional frustrated sigh. My own eyes scanned the screen, trying to spot patterns, anything that felt out of place. The sheer volume of data on the drive was overwhelming. A digital haystack designed to bury any needle of truth. We found encrypted folders within encrypted folders, layers of obfuscation that spoke to a level of paranoia and sophistication that chilled me to the bone. Wait, Jessica suddenly said, her voice sharp with discovery. There's something here. A series of files heavily encrypted, but they're not within the main data structure. They're like an overlay, a separate partition almost disguised as corrupted system files. My heart hammered against my ribs. Can you get into them? I'm trying, she muttered, her fingers flying across the keyboard, a flurry of commands and algorithms flashing on the screen. The encryption is different. It's not a standard military-grade cipher. It's almost organic, self-modifying, like a living algorithm. The description sent an involuntary shiver down my spine. Living algorithm. It sounded like something out of a science fiction nightmare. But given Project Chimera, nothing felt impossible anymore. Minutes stretched into an agonizing eternity. The clock on the wall seemed to mock us, each tick a reminder of our shrinking window. Then a small triumphant gasp escaped Jessica's lips. Got it, she exclaimed, her eyes wide. Partial decryption. It's not everything, but it's enough to see a directory structure. A new window popped up on the screen, revealing a list of cryptic file names. They weren't plain text, but rather a series of alphanumeric strings, each followed by a date and timestamp. These aren't documents, Jessica mused, zooming in. They look like logs, or perhaps command sequences. And look at the date stamps. They're all within the last week. The most recent one is dated just a few hours ago. What do they mean? I urged, leaning closer. I need to run them through a reverse engineering script, she replied, already typing. But based on the file sizes and the pattern, my best guess is that these are instructions, commands being sent to Project Chimera, or perhaps status updates from it. The thought that we might be seeing the live operation of this monstrous project was both exhilarating and terrifying. It meant we were closer than ever, but also that we were treading on extremely thin ice. As Jessica worked, a strange static crackled faintly from the speakers of her laptop, a sound like distant thunder. We both looked up, scanning the room. Nothing. Faded as quickly as it came. "Did you hear that?" I asked. Jessica nodded, her brow furrowed. Just for a second. Probably interference. But her eyes held a flicker of unease. We both knew it could be something more. A warning. A sign that our digging was being noticed. Suddenly, a line of text materialized on the partially decrypted file. It was a fragment, but enough to send a jolt through me. "Initiate under Phase 3. I breathed, my voice barely a whisper. What was Phase 1? Phase 2. Jessica's face was grim. And Protocol Alpha. This isn't just a project. It's a meticulously planned operation. This isn't something that just activates. It's being launched. She continued to work, her focus unyielding, until another breakthrough. "I'm getting coordinates," she announced, her voice strained. "Embedded within the metadata of the latest log file. It's a physical location." A map application immediately loaded, pinpointing a specific address. It was a sprawling industrial park on the outskirts of the city, an area I vaguely recognized as home to several nondescript data centers and logistics hubs. A perfect place to hide something massive and critical. "This must be it," I said, a grim certainty settling over me. "The central hub, where Project Chimera is physically housed, or at least where the final commands are being issued from." Jessica stared at the coordinates, then at me. "Michael, if this is where Chimera is, then it's going to be heavily guarded, and we have no idea what we're walking into. We're talking about an organization capable of building something like this, and they already know we're onto them." The static returned, louder this time, accompanied by a faint, rhythmic pulsing sound. It wasn't coming from the laptop speakers. It was coming from outside. We both froze, our eyes darting to the window. The blinds were drawn, but the rhythmic thrumming vibrated through the glass. Then my phone, sitting silently on the desk, lit up, not with a call or a message, but with a single unread email. The sender was an anonymous string of characters, and the subject line was simply, "Phase 3. My blood ran cold. They knew. They weren't just watching. They were actively communicating, taunting us. This wasn't a warning. It was a confirmation. They knew we had found the coordinates. They knew we were planning something. They're daring us," I said, my voice laced with a mixture of fear and defiance. "They're telling us they know we're coming, and they don't care." Jessica's face was a mask of grim determination. "Then we have to make sure they regret that confidence." She looked at the clock. "Less than 20 hours now. We need a plan, Michael. A way to get in, disrupt whatever Protocol Alpha is, and get out. And we need to do it without getting ourselves killed or caught." The industrial park was likely a fortress. Going in blindly would be suicide. But we had something they didn't anticipate. The hard drive itself. The very tool they had used to track and control was now our key, our weapon. "What if," I began, an idea forming in my mind, "what if the hard drive isn't just a data repository but a backdoor? A way to bypass their security, or at least confuse it long enough for us to act?" Jessica's eyes lit up with a flicker of hope. "It's plausible. If this drive belonged to one of their key operatives, it could have embedded access protocols, even a master key. We might be able to use its unique signature to trick their systems into thinking we belong." The pulsing sound outside intensified for a moment, then abruptly ceased, leaving a chilling silence in its wake. It was a clear message. They knew. They were waiting. We were two ordinary people, armed with a stolen hard drive and a rapidly dwindling amount of time, going up against an invisible, all-powerful organization. The odds were astronomically against us, but the alternative, letting Project Chimera unleash its terrifying control, was simply unthinkable. "All right," I said, a newfound resolve hardening my voice. "Let's figure out how to use this thing to burn their operation to the ground. We have less than 20 hours. Our next move will determine the fate of millions, and we have one shot to get it right. We're going to that industrial park." The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of our decision. Jessica and Michael exchanged a glance, a silent acknowledgement of the impossible task ahead. There was no going back now. We were all in. "All right, David," Jessica said, her voice steady, pulling a small, portable workstation from her backpack. It was a marvel of compact computing power, clearly built for her specific line of work. "Let's see what this little black box can really do. Michael, while I'm digging into the hardware, can you pull up some schematics of that industrial park? David's data should have some outdated blueprints, but we need to see what's changed, what we're up against physically." We huddled around the device, the glowing screen of Jessica's laptop casting an eerie light on our determined faces. I pointed to a series of cryptic symbols etched onto the device's casing, symbols I'd glimpsed in the stolen data. "Based on what I found, this isn't just a jammer. It's part of their core infrastructure. It's designed to interface with their distributed network, not just disrupt it. Think of it like a master key, but for their entire digital kingdom." Jessica's fingers flew across her keyboard, a flurry of code and command lines scrolling rapidly. She connected a series of miniature probes and cables to the black box, her brow furrowed in concentration. "You're right, David. This isn't a simple signal disruptor. It's a network manipulation tool. It's designed to inject, reroute, and even overwrite data on their proprietary frequency. It's a digital ghost, able to become any part of their network it wants. This thing could literally turn their own systems against them, make them believe their own lies, or broadcast the truth straight from their central servers." My mind reeled. So, it's not just about taking them down. It's about exposing them, making them self-destruct. "Precisely," Jessica confirmed, a glint of fierce satisfaction in her eyes. "If we deploy this correctly, we could flood the internet with their dark secrets, all while making it look like an internal system failure. Imagine their own network broadcasting their crimes to the world." Michael, meanwhile, had spread out a series of satellite images and faded blueprints on the table, cross-referencing them with my hard drive data. The industrial park is massive, mostly abandoned warehouses, but the target building, it's in the center. No windows, reinforced walls, and a surprisingly robust, privately maintained fiber optic connection running directly to it, not just standard lines. It screams server farm. He traced a finger along a perimeter fence. Standard chain link, but with motion sensors and cameras. Not military grade, but definitely professional. There are blind spots though. Old loading docks. A section where a tree line grew unexpectedly high. What about personnel? I asked, my heart thumping. Are we talking about a skeleton crew or a small army? My data indicates a rotating security detail, usually 2 shifts of 4 guards, Michael explained. But with the operation nearing its peak, it's possible they've ramped up. The hard drive mentioned a final phase deployment. That could mean more hands on deck, or perhaps fewer, but more specialized personnel. Jessica suddenly let out a sharp gasp. I've got it. The black box has a primary interface. It's designed to connect directly to their main server rack. It's not wireless. We need to physically plug this into their core system. A collective groan escaped us. Physically. I repeated, the reality of the situation hitting me harder than ever. That means getting inside, past all the security. It's the only way to ensure a full system takeover, Jessica stated grimly. A direct neural link, so to speak, for their network. Anything less, and they'll just cut the signal or reroute around us. Michael slammed his fist lightly on the table, a sudden surge of adrenaline in his voice. All right then, our objective is clear. Infiltrate the central building, locate their main server rack, and plug this device in. Once it's connected, Jessica, you handle the digital side. David, you'll be our eyes and ears, using your knowledge of their internal systems to guide Jessica to the most critical data points. I'll be our insurance policy, making sure we get in and out alive. We spent the next few hours meticulously planning. Michael outlined entry and exit routes, identifying the precise moments when security patrols would be furthest away from our chosen infiltration point. Jessica designed a rapid deployment script for the black box, a program that would instantly begin siphoning data and broadcasting it, along with a failsafe to wipe their crucial systems if necessary. I used the hard drive's internal network diagrams to pinpoint the exact location of the server room within the building, even identifying a maintenance tunnel that might offer a less obvious approach. The fear was a constant companion, a cold knot in my stomach, but beneath it, a burning resolve had taken root. We were no longer just running, we were fighting back. The faces of the millions whose lives were being manipulated flashed through my mind. Innocent people, their privacy stolen, their thoughts subtly redirected, their futures perhaps even engineered by this shadowy organization. The thought fueled me. As the first hint of dawn began to paint the sky, we packed our gear. Minimalist, practical, designed for stealth. Dark clothing, comms, a few basic tools. The black box, now nestled securely in a padded case, felt like a ticking time bomb. "Remember," Michael said, his voice low and serious as we got into his nondescript sedan. "Once we're in, we're on their turf. No heroics, no unnecessary risks. Our goal is to deploy the device, extract proof, and get out. If anything goes sideways, we adapt or we abort. Clear?" We both nodded, our breaths held tight. The drive was silent, the tension in the car palpable. Each mile brought us closer to the unknown, closer to the heart of the beast. The rising sun, usually a symbol of hope, felt like an ominous spotlight, illuminating our path to inevitable confrontation. As we neared the industrial park, the landscape transformed. The suburban sprawl gave way to decaying factories, empty lots, and finally, the imposing, identical structures of the park itself. It was far larger than I'd imagined, a labyrinth of concrete and corrugated steel. Our target building, devoid of any distinguishing features save for its fortified appearance, stood like a silent sentinel in the center. Michael parked a good distance away, tucked behind a cluster of overgrown bushes, offering us a vantage point without drawing attention. We pulled out binoculars, scanning the perimeter. High fences topped with razor wire, cameras strategically placed, but just as Michael predicted, there were blind spots. The wind whipped around us, carrying the faint, metallic scent of industry. "The old loading dock entrance on the west side," Michael murmured, pointing. "It's partially obscured by a defunct water tower and has a slight dip in the ground that could offer cover. It's our best bet for getting to the fence line unseen." Jessica's comms crackled softly. "I'm picking up a faint network signature from the target building. It's heavily encrypted, but it's alive. They're definitely active." My stomach tightened. The hard drive mentioned they run their final phase operations around the clock, but peak activity often occurs during the early morning hours, around now, when the rest of the world is still waking up. We watched, waiting for the perfect moment, observing the rhythmic sweep of the cameras, the slow, predictable patrol of a lone security guard in a golf cart. Every minute felt like an hour. Our plan felt solid, meticulously crafted, but plans I knew rarely survived first contact. Just as Michael was about to give the signal, a sudden, unexpected change shattered our carefully constructed calm. A large, unmarked black van, tinted windows obscuring its contents, rolled slowly through the main gate. It wasn't a standard security vehicle. Didn't belong. It drove directly to our target building, stopping at a service entrance we hadn't accounted for. Two figures, heavily built and dressed in dark, tactical gear, emerged. They moved with a purpose that spoke of serious training, not just routine security. They weren't guards. They were something else entirely. And they had just added a terrifying, unknown variable to our already desperate mission. Our window was closing, and the stakes just skyrocketed. The silence in our makeshift command center, a dilapidated motel room miles from the compound, was deafening. David was pale, running a hand over his bald head. Jessica, usually so composed, chewed on her lip, a nervous habit I'd rarely seen. My own stomach churned, a cold knot tightening with each passing second. We just watched the footage of those guards on repeat, dissecting every move, every subtle signal. It wasn't just the precision, the practiced economy of motion. It was the chilling, almost predatory calm in their eyes, even through the grainy night vision. "They're not just security," Jessica finally whispered, her voice barely audible. "They're operators. Military grade. Black Ops, maybe." David nodded slowly. "Special forces at bare minimum. These aren't guys hired from a local agency to watch a warehouse. This is a private army, and they're protecting something vital. Something worth killing for." The implications were stark. Our initial plan, a delicate dance of distraction and infiltration, now seemed laughably naive. We weren't just bypassing cameras and motion sensors. We were going up against trained killers who likely operated under a shoot-to-kill mandate. The hard drive, the truth it held, suddenly felt heavier, a burden that could crush us all. "So what now?" I asked, the words feeling hollow. "Do we just walk away? Let them win?" Jessica looked at me, her eyes hardened by resolve. Walking away isn't an option, Michael. Not after everything. Not after what they did to Daniel. And who knows how many others. This isn't just about us anymore. This is about exposing them. David sighed, running a hand over his face. She's right. But we can't go in guns blazing. We don't have the firepower, the numbers, or the training for that. We need to be smarter. We need to be ghosts. Our revised strategy began to form in the pre-dawn darkness, fueled by stale coffee and a desperate hope. We needed to understand their patrol patterns better, identify blind spots that even their advanced training couldn't cover. We needed a diversion so massive, so unexpected, that it would draw all their attention, even if only for a few crucial minutes. And we needed to be prepared to move faster, quieter, and more decisively than ever before. Jessica pulled up satellite imagery, overlaying it with thermal scans and the limited schematics we'd managed to piece together from the hard drive's fragmented data. The main server array is deep within the facility, underground, reinforced, she explained, pointing to a section of the digital blueprint. Getting there will be the hardest part. Multiple checkpoints, biometric locks, likely pressure plates and laser grids we can't even detect from here. And those operators will be patrolling the interior as well, David added, his gaze fixed on the screen. They won't just be on the perimeter. They'll be everywhere. We need to create a secondary objective, I suggested, an idea starting to crystallize. Something that makes them think they're under attack from a different angle. Something that forces them to split their forces, or at least divert their attention from the server room. David's eyes lit up. A feint. A big one. Something that sounds like a full-scale assault, even if it's just a whisper in the wind. Jessica began typing furiously. I can rig a series of small, localized EMP emitters. They won't disable everything, but they'll cause enough localized disruption to their comms and some non-essential systems to create a panic. And I can spoof some thermal signatures, make it look like a team is breaching the north wall. That's good, I said, a flicker of grim optimism. Distract them with a ghost attack on the north. While they're scrambling, David and I go in through the south, hitting a less protected service entrance we identified. Jessica, you stay here monitoring their responses, guiding us through their internal network as best you can. David nodded, his earlier apprehension replaced by a steely focus. It's a suicide mission, but it's the only mission. We go in light. No unnecessary gear. Just what we need to get to that server and get out. The following hours were a blur of meticulous preparation. Jessica configured her laptop, creating the programs for the EMP bursts and thermal decoys. David and I stripped down our gear, choosing only essentials, lockpicking tools, a small cutting torch for specific types of reinforced doors, our comms, and a few non-lethal deterrents we'd managed to acquire. The air was thick with unspoken tension. The knowledge that this was it. Every decision, every movement had to be perfect. As dusk settled, casting long, menacing shadows across the landscape, we moved. David and I, clad in dark, non-reflective tactical gear, approached the compound from the south, using the cover of dense scrubland and the fading light. Jessica was positioned several miles away, her van a mobile command center, her fingers dancing across her keyboard, ready to unleash the digital storm. All right, Michael, David whispered into his comms. Jessica says the first EMP burst goes off in 3 minutes. That's our cue to move fast. Remember, silence is everything. Any unexpected sound, any slip-up, and those operators will be on us before we even know what hit us. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of the night. The compound loomed ahead, a dark, monolithic structure against the bruised twilight sky. It looked impregnable, a fortress built to guard the most dangerous secrets. Every nerve ending in my body screamed at me to turn back, but the faces of Daniel, of Emily, of all the innocent lives threatened by the syndicate flashed through my mind. This wasn't just for me anymore. Copy that, David. I whispered back, my voice tight. Let's do this. The first EMP burst wasn't a visible explosion, but we felt it. A subtle hum, a momentary flicker in the distant security lights, then a series of frantic, distorted voices crackling over their external comms, barely audible even from our distance. Jessica had done it. Go, 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 David urged, and we sprinted across the final stretch of open ground, hugging the shadows of the compound's south wall. The service entrance was a heavy, reinforced steel door, tucked away in a recessed alcove, less visible from the main watchtowers. David, a former locksmith with a knack for bypassing electronic systems, immediately went to work, his fingers nimble and precise. Inside my ear, Jessica's voice was a calm presence amidst the chaos. "They're scrambling, guys. Heavy activity on the north perimeter. Thermal signatures showing multiple teams deploying. They're buying it." A wave of relief, short-lived and quickly replaced by renewed tension, washed over me. David grunted, a quiet click echoing in the night as the heavy electronic lock disengaged. He pulled the door open just enough for us to slip through, then carefully resecured it from the inside, plunging us into a world of oppressive silence and absolute darkness. The interior was a maze of dimly lit corridors, the air thick with the smell of ozone and something metallic industrial. We moved with practiced stealth, our footsteps barely whispers on the concrete floor. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, every distant hum a potential alarm. Jessica was our eyes and ears, guiding us through the internal schematics, warning us of approaching patrols. "Two operators, Sector 3 moving east," she hissed into our comms. "Hold position in the utility closet to your left. They'll pass in 30 seconds." We froze, pressing ourselves into the cramped, dust-filled space, our breaths held tight. The sound of heavy, measured footsteps grew louder, then faded. I could feel David's tension mirroring my own. These weren't just men. They were extensions of an invisible, deadly system. We continued our slow, agonizing progress deeper into the facility. Each turn, each door felt like a roll of the dice. We bypassed a pressure plate by carefully distributing our weight, disarmed a laser grid with a small, specialized device David carried. The deeper we went, the more sophisticated the security became. This wasn't just a data center, it was a vault. Then we hit a wall. A massive reinforced blast door, unlike anything we'd seen, stood between us and the server array. It was thick, seamless, and hummed with a faint, almost imperceptible energy. "Jessica, we're at the main vault door," I whispered, my voice strained. "Any way to bypass this from your end?" A moment of silence, then her voice laced with frustration. "Negative, Michael. This system is offline from the main network. It's an independent circuit. Manual override only, and I don't have the codes." David examined the door, running his gloved hand over its surface. "This isn't just a lock, Michael. This is a failsafe, designed to withstand a siege. There might be a manual override panel, but it'll be hidden, and it won't be easy to access." Suddenly, a new voice crackled through our comms, not Jessica's. It was distorted, barely intelligible, but unmistakably human. And it was coming from inside the facility, not from our external network. "Intruder alert. Sector Gamma. 2 hostiles detected near the main server vault. Armed response initiated." My blood ran cold. They knew. Not from our diversion, not from an alarm we triggered. They knew we were there, specifically at the vault. Someone had been watching us from the inside. Someone who had bypassed Jessica's entire network. We'd been played. The feint, the MP bursts, the thermal decoys. They were all just noise while the real trap was sprung. "Michael? David? What was that?" Jessica's voice was sharp, laced with panic. "My systems show no breach, no detection. How did they know?" "We've been compromised, Jessica," David hissed, pulling out a compact, silenced pistol. "Someone in here saw us coming. Or someone let us come." The sound of heavy boots echoed down the corridor, closer this time, accompanied by the metallic clang of weapons. They weren't just coming, they were converging. We were trapped between an impenetrable vault door and an approaching squadron of highly trained killers. Our window hadn't just closed, it had shattered, and the terrifying realization dawned on me. The hard drive hadn't just led us to a secret. It had led us into a meticulously laid ambush, a trap designed to capture or eliminate anyone who dared to get this close. We weren't just being watched, we were being hunted. And the hunter was already inside the room. The hunter was already inside the room. The realization hit me like a physical blow, a cold dread seeping into my bones. My eyes darted to Sarah, then to David. They both looked as stunned and confused as I felt, their faces pale in the dim, flickering light of the server racks. But the words echoed, a chilling whisper in my mind, inside the room. A subtle shift in the air, a barely perceptible click. The heavy reinforced door we'd entered through, the one David had expertly bypassed, now sealed with a soft, final thud. A red light blinked above it, a silent sentinel of our impending doom. We were trapped. What was that? Sarah whispered, her voice tight with fear. David moved first, not towards the door, but towards a small recessed panel on the wall, his fingers flying over it. "Security override," he mumbled, his brow furrowed. "It shouldn't have activated. I disabled the local network." His usual calm was gone, replaced by a frantic urgency. Then he froze. His hand hovered over the panel, his eyes wide, fixed on something just beyond my line of sight. A profound silence descended, broken only by the hum of the servers. "David?" I asked, a knot tightening in my stomach. "What is it?" He slowly turned, his face a mask of something I couldn't quite decipher. Fear, resignation, and a flicker of something colder. In his hand, which I hadn't seen him draw, was a small, sleek pistol, its barrel fitted with a suppressor. My breath caught in my throat. Sarah gasped, a sharp choke sound. "I'm sorry, Michael," David said, his voice flat, devoid of the camaraderie we'd shared for weeks. "I truly am." It was a punch to the gut, a betrayal so profound it momentarily stole my ability to think. David, the quiet, brilliant tech expert who had helped me unravel so much of this mystery. The man who had seemed genuinely invested in finding the truth. "David, what are you doing?" I managed my voice hoarse. "Who are you working for?" He didn't answer directly. Instead, he gestured with the pistol towards Sarah. "The hard drive, Sarah. Place it on the central console." Slowly. Sarah, her face a mixture of shock and terror, clutched the hard drive tighter. "No. What is this, David? We trusted you." "You had to," he replied, his gaze unwavering, betraying no emotion. "It was the only way to get you here. To get the drive here. This whole thing." I realized, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place with a sickening clarity. The hard drive, the clues, the help you gave me, it was all a setup. You were leading me. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "The hard drive was bait, Michael. A well-placed piece of bread for a curious bird. The organization, the Citadel, knew someone would find it. They wanted to see who. They wanted to see how far you'd go. And when you kept digging, when you started getting too close to the real core of things, I was tasked with guiding you here. To secure the data. And to eliminate any loose ends." My mind raced, trying to process the enormity of his deception. "The Citadel? What is the Citadel?" "A necessary evil," David said, his voice gaining a strange, almost zealous edge. "A global intelligence and security firm, operating beyond the reach of governments. We ensure order, stability. Your hard drive contained fragments of data about Project Chimera, a surveillance grid that monitors global communications. But you, Michael, you found more. You found the heart of it all. This server room isn't just a data hub. It's the primary control center for Chimera, and the repository for all of the Citadel's most sensitive operations. The man who owned your hard drive, Robert Maxwell, he was trying to expose us. He paid the price. And you're willing to do the same?" Sarah interjected, her voice trembling but firm. "Betray us? Murder us?" David's eyes flickered, a momentary tremor of something human. "My family, Sarah. The Citadel has them. They promised their safety if I complied. If I secured this drive and ensured no one ever spoke of this place again." His words hung heavy in the air, a desperate plea for understanding hidden beneath the cold resolve. But understanding wouldn't save us. "Give me the drive, Sarah," David commanded, raising the pistol slightly. "Now." I knew what I had to do. This wasn't just about us anymore. It was about everything we had uncovered, everything Robert Maxwell had died trying to expose. "Sarah, don't," I shouted, lunging forward, not at David, but at a heavy-wheeled server rack beside me. With a grunt I shoved it, sending it crashing into a nearby console, sparks flying. David reacted instantly, his shot deafening even with the suppressor, the bullet embedding itself into the metal rack where my head had been moments before. The distraction bought us precious seconds. "Run, Sarah," I yelled, scrambling away, ducking behind a row of humming machines. Sarah, quick-witted despite her fear, didn't hesitate. She threw the hard drive not at David but across the room, towards a cluster of cables and open ports on another server stack. "Catch, Michael," David cursed, turning his attention to the flying hard drive. He fired again, the bullet ricocheting off a metal casing. I dove, sliding on the polished floor, my fingers brushing against the hard drive as it tumbled to a stop. I snatched it up, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Michael, the main console," Sarah screamed, pointing towards a large central workstation that seemed to be the nerve center of the room. The override. I understood. Robert Maxwell, the original owner of the hard drive, a man who had worked for the Citadel and had tried to expose them, must have left a failsafe, a backdoor, a contingency. The hard drive wasn't just data. It was a key. David, realizing my intent, moved with terrifying speed. He bounded over the server rack, his pistol aimed directly at me. "Don't you dare, Michael. You'll destroy everything." "Good." I roared, my adrenaline surging. I launched myself at the main console, ignoring the burning pain in my side from a graze I hadn't even noticed. My fingers fumbled with the hard drive, desperately trying to orient it, to plug it into the correct port. David was almost on me, his shadow looming. "It's over." Just as he reached me, I slammed the hard drive home. Clicked into place. A hidden partition, a cryptic file name I'd seen but never understood, flashed on the console screen. Chimera X. "No!" David screamed, his face contorted in a mixture of rage and desperation. He fired, but I ducked, feeling the wind of the bullet as it whizzed past my ear. With a final desperate surge, I hit the enter key. The server room erupted. Alarms blared, piercing and deafening, echoing off the metal walls. Red lights flashed maniacally. The console screen, moments ago displaying complex data, was now awash with lines of code scrolling at impossible speeds. Data streams, depicted as glowing lines, shot across the screen, not just to internal networks but outwards through encrypted channels to the public internet, to specific pre-programmed journalistic outlets, to international human rights organizations, to law enforcement agencies Robert Maxwell had meticulously identified. "What have you done?" David roared, abandoning his attack, rushing to the console, his fingers flying across the keyboard in a frantic attempt to stop the cascade. "I've opened Pandora's box, David." I yelled back, my voice hoarse. "Your Citadel is exposed. Project Chimera is exposed." The system groaned, overwhelmed. Smoke began to curl from several server units. The lights flickered violently, some going dark entirely. The emergency lockdown on the main door suddenly disengaged with a loud thunk, the red light above it turning green. The override had triggered a system-wide meltdown, designed not just to expose, but to create an escape route. "Go, Michael. Now!" Sarah shouted, grabbing my arm, pulling me towards the now open door. David was still at the console, pounding on the keys, his face a mask of despair as he watched the irreversible data flood. His family's safety, his twisted loyalty, all crumbling before his eyes. We burst through the door, the alarm still screaming behind us, the building now alive with chaos. We could hear footsteps, shouts, the distant wail of sirens growing louder. The Citadel was reacting, but it was too late. The information was out. The world was waking up. We didn't look back. We ran down dimly lit corridors, through emergency exits, into the cool night air. We were pursued, shadowy figures barking orders, but in the confusion and the sudden, overwhelming exposure, they were disorganized, reacting to too many simultaneous threats. We melted into the labyrinth of the city, disappearing into the crowds, leaving the crumbling edifice of the Citadel and David's desperate betrayal behind us. The next few days were a blur. We stayed off the grid, watching the news unfold from hidden corners, verifying the impact of our desperate act. The headlines were apocalyptic. Global surveillance network exposed. The Citadel, shadow government unveiled. Project Chimera, the end of privacy. Arrests were made, indictments filed. Key figures from the Citadel were apprehended, their vast network beginning to unravel. We were safe for now, but the world had changed, and so had we. The hard drive, that innocuous piece of tech I'd bought for a few dollars, hadn't just held secrets. It had been a weapon, a catalyst that shattered a shadowy empire. Sarah and I eventually found a semblance of normalcy, though it was a new kind of normal. We knew too much. We had seen the depths of power and the cost of truth. The constant vigilance, the feeling of being watched, never truly left me. Even with the Citadel dismantled, the internet remembered. The information was out there, for good and for ill. And somewhere in the vast, interconnected world, new shadows would always form. The fight for privacy, for freedom, was never truly over. It was a battle won, but the war, I realized, was eternal. And I, the ordinary man who just wanted to fix a broken hard drive, was now forever a part of it.